Hello, I'm the Angry Spork. Earlier this year, we looked at the first issue of the Marvel comic adaptation of a certain cult favorite cartoon.
Previously on Gargoyles.
Demona was flying around in mech armor, kidnapping construction workers for Project Medusa, some new scheme between her and millionaire villain David Xanatos. Goliath and Elisa managed to stop her, rescue the abductees, and put a big hole in the ship-based lab. Though with the addition of the mysterious Dr. Phobos, Project Medusa was still alive and kicking. And since I have the planning and scheduling capacity of a pressed ham on Xanax, which is a joke that not even I get, I'm taking issue with issues 2 and 3. Let's see if this next adventure for our winged warriors makes us want to turn the page, or turn our heads. Issue 2's cover sees the trio dive-bombing toward the reader. Or the street, given the angle of those buildings. They've acclimated to New York just enough to instinctively attack whenever they hear someone say, "Yankees suck!" Wait a minute, I just said, uh-oh. Ah! Broadway and Lexington look generally ticked off, but Brooklyn looks maliciously gleeful, like he's going to enjoy the fight he's getting into. Written by Martin Pasco, with art by Amanda Connor, Alberto Saichan, the Palmiotti brothers, and Greg Wright, we begin with narration from Elisa Mazza's personal diary. A 1,000-year-old gargoyle who's into high-tech, big time. Something about that really cracks me up. So easy, a gargoyle can do it. Lex has convinced the other two to help test a wrist-mounted tracker he found in the trash and fixed up. Apparently designed to help parents keep track of their small kids, he wants to see if it'll be able to keep tabs on the wristbands worn by his Rookery brothers when they fly off from him. Strangely, I don't recall that big 90s parental tech craze. Monitor your kids with LoJack Jr. I'm not that thrilled about having you for a brother. I know I don't want you for a keeper.
That hurt here and here.
Seriously, that was just mean. Broadway tells Brooklyn to chill so they can get this over with. They fly on opposite sides of the building from Lex, and when they meet up again, the little dude is the only one thrilled to find the tracker works. Oh good, now we can die happy. You should be more tolerant of Lexington. He just proved he's the only one that can find your bodies. At this time, Hudson was tuning into the show America Exposed, soon joined by Goliath, wherein host Ian Hyde Whitney focuses on questionable activities of Xanatos Enterprises and its owner, whom he points out is a convicted felon, from events in the first episodes of the series. It's been about a month since the Genutech boat incident, and even though it was alleged to house some kind of laboratory, the ship was repaired by automated choppers, firing some kind of sealant on the hull, I guess, and sailed out to sea before authorities arrived, all captured by news cameras. They happened to be in the area covering a story about Pizza Rat's pop culture rival, Bagel Pigeon. Goliath wanted to ask Hudson where the trio were. Weird thing is, the dialogue bubbles are kinda messed up. It seems like you're supposed to read Hudson's first, and then the one from Big G right above it, then the one at the bottom attached to it, but that's misattributed to Goliath. As the only one in the clan with a Scottish accent, calling the guys lads means this is supposed to be the old mentor explaining they left shortly after sundown. It's like Goliath is answering his own question that they went to check out the clubs. New caveman weapons exhibit at the Natural History Museum. Actually, it's a place Broadway discovered called Sacrilege, which just so happens to be across from an old church. That's gotta provide some mixed marketing opportunities for you. Also, the sign magically appears when you get in closer on the next panel. Artist mishap or in-universe optical illusion where you can only see it at ground level. Anyway, even though they've just arrived, they'll have to head home soon, and Brooklyn is irritated that they spent all night on Lex's experiment instead of partying. Perhaps on the roof where no one could see them? Inside the club, a hood named Price and his date Levon are being hassled by a man called Glasses. He's a realtor that deals exclusively in glass houses. Gets a commission if he convinces the buyers to get stone insurance. No, he's the right hand of a mob boss called Tony Dracon, a recurring antagonist in the series. He's joined by an associate, I think only from the comics, called Snick, who clips his fingernails in public, which is kinda gross. He wants people to associate his nickname with the sound of the nail clipper, because he doesn't want people figuring out his nickname is really based on how big of a fan he is of that nighttime programming block on Nickelodeon. Really kills the whole mob muscle mystique. Turns out the young Price has been selling merchandise, but not providing the boss's cut of the take. Price insists he hasn't gone against Dracon, just that it's become more difficult to find customers that have enough cash to buy. Levon becomes distraught, thinking they're talking about drugs, but that's not the case, as Snick outright admits they're talking about guns.
Pinky, you are a fistful of stupidity.
Glasses adds to this, elaborating that they're experimental and very pricey, hence their problem. Using those very high-tech weapons, the enforcers lead Price and Levon outside, since now the lady knows too much about the business. Because you idiots told her! I guess they had an instant dislike of her and just looked for any excuse to shoot her, since she could have been a useful bargaining chip without knowing what was going on. Not advocating, just saying. Two women standing on a nearby street corner in skimpy outfits. I'm guessing they're copyright attorneys taking a smoke break. Anyway, they spot some gar-whatcha-columns flying above, when Price elbows Glasses and runs, only to be gunned down by Snick. The bullet that did him in, despite this angle of fire, somehow went up diagonally, narrowly missing the trio.
Take that, physics.
For whatever reason, a curious Broadway decides to dig into the brick wall where the projectile impacted, removing a corkscrew-shaped bullet that seems completely unaffected by both going through a hoodlum and hitting a brick wall.
Not scientifically possible!
Elise's narration notes they never found out what happened to the girlfriend, as she was forced into the limousine, screaming, so Dracon would decide her fate. Snick, meanwhile, decided to execute one of the girls who saw too much, that she has a cheeseball life, and he's a regular angel of mercy doing her a favor. Sure you don't want to go ahead and exposit more of your boss's criminal enterprise first? That'd at least be consistent. Whatever you think about prostitution, cheeseball life is just a really weird comment to make, right? Even if you need to clean up the dialogue for younger readers, it's such an odd choice. Now, despite saying previously that Dawn was too close and there was nothing they could do about those shots, Lex swoops down and attacks the gunman while the woman flees.
Yeah! What the devil? The devil has nothing to do with this.
Tell them there are limits to even my power.
After speechifying about appearances, that what the handsome human did to Price was uglier than the Goyle will ever be, Broadway and Brooklyn land on the nearby church, waiting for their companion. Hey Lex, move it or lose it. They're not gonna hold Dawn for you. Have you at least asked? You won't know unless you try. As Snick lunges for our gold-skinned hero, the dialogue continues getting a bit weird. As Lexington clarifies, his attack was meant to knock the gun away, as his tail slaps it into the storm drain. And he goes on to say how he isn't going to walk away after cutting the guy. He's got claws for climbing up the wall. This dialogue does sound very comic booky, I'll admit. It makes sense in a comic involving Daredevil, Spider-Man, Nightwing, Tim Draker's spoiler before the big dumb reboot, but it doesn't fit these characters. They're very new to this world and generally avoid human contact because they've seen how people typically react. Fear, panic, and even resorting to violence, even if they're not being threatening. So it's a tad weird when one of them starts dropping philosophy and morality on a modern-day criminal, much less describing why he was doing what he was doing. The show did have instances that were not too dissimilar, but for some reason here it just feels a little off. After Lexington leaves, the enforcers drive to the Park Manor Hotel, taking the freight elevator to avoid getting spotted taking a panicked woman against her will. As his rookery brothers worry about him, Lex is 2 blocks away, finding a place to rest for the day as the sun finally arrives, and they turn to stone. The sun sure took a while, given how many times it was said it was seconds away. Levon has been taken to Tony Dracon's penthouse in the hotel, as he guides Xanatos' assistant, Owen Burnett, right to her.
Says she's 20, but I figure it's more like 16.
You know, sometimes ages can be difficult to pin down on looks alone, but that line just feels a bit creepy. Maybe it's because of how this young lady is dressed. Maybe it's because she's been taken captive by a guy who was already kind of creepy in the show. Who can say? Despite apparently not being able to pinpoint her age, Tony does know she's a runaway that hasn't been reported, so won't be missed. An ideal test subject. Burnett uses a neurophage weapon, like from the first issue, to incapacitate her. Either that or imbue her with kryptonite. At the police station, Elisa is questioning the girl Lex saved, though she was too scared to remember much about the gunman. She told them about the flying monster, which a fatigued Detective Mazza had to quickly remember to brush off with skepticism, since Captain Chavez was watching from behind the mirror. It's confirmed Price is dead, flatlining in the ER. Though from that overhead shot when Lex took off what looks like blood spatter underneath his head, I think he flatlined long before getting to a hospital.
Are you a real doctor or a doctor like Dr. Pepper's a doctor?
Chavez is certain that the sketch they get will end up resembling one of Dracon's men, but that alone isn't going to get an arrest. Elisa's partner, Matt Bluestone, is more focused on the gargoyle portion of the girl's testimony, then suffers a sudden headache. His doctor told him it was normal given his concussion in the first issue, but he hasn't been taking his painkillers because they knock him out, and he doesn't want that happening on duty. I wanted to wait until I started on building a bookshelf with my brand new bandsaw. Elisa enters looking like she's at a modeling photo shoot, certain the description matches Drew Crenshaw, aka Snick. That will be encouraging for her and her new partner, as Chavez remands Matt to a minimum of 2 weeks sick leave, until he's free of both his headaches and his need of painkillers. And Elisa just kind of moseys on out to avoid the uncomfortable situation, or so they don't see her hair blending into her skin like a chameleon. Also, it didn't immediately register to me Mazza had traded in her usual red jacket for a sleeveless flannel overshirt. I guess the red coloring is enough like her usual look that it doesn't seem too off-putting. When you think about it, it must get hot under that coat running around all day and night, so this breezier, more breathable option just makes sense. And I do digs me the flannel look. Some construction workers are removing the statuary from the church to be sold off by the land's new owners, which includes the petrified Brooklyn and Broadway. And once everyone is clear, they'll begin planting demolition charges. Man, these gargoyles will probably go for real big bucks. They come with brand new smartwatches. Not long after, Elisa walks into a bar to arrest Snick. He runs, but she shoots one of the shelves holding the cues, causing it to fall down on him? Okay, I feel like I gotta use this clip again.
Take that, physics.
Meanwhile, Xanatos is in his office contacting Dr. Phobos, who's really bad at subtlety, because David refers to Levon as the shipment, and the doc replies that Owen delivered it, then specifies her. That kind of risks the subterfuge, doesn't it? He is supposed to be a scientist, right? Like, smart?
Real doctor or PhD?
PhD.
In any case, he says that more human subjects are unnecessary, as blood and tissue samples were recovered from the wreckage, and have produced the expected products.
Enough beanie babies to crash the market and be weaponized as your loyal cybernetic soldiers.
Yet they're still putting the young woman in a stasis tube because reasons, I guess. Every target for Project Medusa is expected to be met, and within the month, they'll be able to breed not only whatever human subjects they might need, but even a gargoyle. The true origin of Baby Yoda turned out to be nothing like what people expected. Elisa is running on 2 hours sleep, but that's not going to stop things from piling up, like all the stuff on her desk. Paperwork, a Godzilla figure, chattering teeth. Did she fight the Joker recently? And an old-fashioned whoopee cushion. Is the comics version of Elisa the precinct's resident prankster, or is she the mom that confiscates everyone else's stuff when they play a joke on her? Her sister Beth is there, having had a fight with their folks and needing a place to crash. And that's when Chavez shows up saying her witness claims she didn't recognize anyone in the perp lineup, so Snick is going to walk in 24 hours if she doesn't find some solid evidence. At Dracon's penthouse, where this scene of bikini girls snapping towels at each other is totally necessary to the plot, Mazza narrates how she had to wait until sundown to investigate further, and speculating on how Dracon's butler noticed an unusual new statue with a tail, seeming to wear a digital watch. Wait a minute. Who could afford a digital watch and a statue salary? Elisa goes to the Gargoyles' clock tower home, which, again, in the comics, is above a library. She finds her suspicions proven that the monsters her witness saw were the trio, as they aren't on the balcony like they usually are. As she waits for sundown, Dracon is informed about the winged stone creature that seemed to appear from nowhere, and is shown the device Lex was wearing. Wait a minute.
Who could afford a digital watch on a statue's salary?
It sounds similar enough to the creatures he met in the episode Deadly Force that he grabs a fireplace poker and decides to smash the stone creature himself, ending the issue on a pretty good cliffhanger. Kind of a weird move, though, given that he doesn't know these monsters turn into stone during the day. Maybe he's got PTSD from nearly being eviscerated. He'll destroy anything with wings and a tail. Issue 3's cover sees Goliath tossing around a couple of armed goons, with what may be a fire going on in the background. Maybe that's why Lex is screaming in horror in the corner logo here. Fortunately, at the last second, the sun had sunk beneath the horizon, and Lexington awoke before he could be shattered. Dracon still presses his attack, however, while oddly expositing the epiphany that these creatures that are still relatively new to him actually turn to stone during the day, since his foe didn't react when he was previously right on top of him. As much as it feels like a leap, I suppose it's not too outlandish that he'd put that together, and the cartoon version was pretty full of himself, so I could see him explaining it out loud, maybe as kind of a taunt that he's figuring things out to find a weakness or something. At the clock tower, Elisa apparently nodded off, waiting for the others to wake up, and Goliath holding her chin like that is much less subtle about their romantic tension than the cartoon was at this time. She recaps the shooting from the previous issue, as well as the witness who saw the trio, and needs to know if the guys saw the incident. Also, in this flashback panel, it looks like she's lying down on the table. It's the old good cop, aggressively relaxed cop routine. Brooklyn woke up in a warehouse alone, and trying to find Broadway, accidentally broke another statue. This alerted a guard that opened fire when he saw him. Lexington was also avoiding gunfire when Dracon's butler showed up, and the gargoyle headed back home after confirming he wasn't being followed, with Tony advising his goon to stand down after all the damage to hotel property they've just done.
I'm gonna have to take on some extra hits just to pay the bill I'm gonna get stuck with.
Of all the times for his mob hideout to get sprayed for termites. Returning to the clock tower, Lex relays what he saw outside the club, and how Broadway had the bullet that killed Price. Mazza figures if there's traces of the victim's DNA on it, and ballistics to match Snick's gun, they'll have a case. Elsewhere, Broadway woke up in the back of the truck, parked on the property of some small business owners that evidently sell lawn ornaments. You know how in the show when gargoyles wake up, it's always this roaring, dramatic thing where they stretch out and stone flies out? Well, I guess he managed to keep to himself all cramped in the back there without much of a disturbance, yet when he climbs out of the trailer, he not only breaks another statue, but trips some motion-activated floodlights, and is subsequently spotted by the proprietors.
It's one of them. I heard about their kind. Gargoyles, they call them. See, Saul? I told you they were real, but did you listen?
Sophie, you used to talk about UFOs in Utah, and I didn't listen then either.
Right, and Cousin Bert in Cedar City got abducted, got probed, and then woke up on the roof of his apartment building. The bright side is those aliens done saved him a trip to the proctologist.
Lexington explains to Elisa that getting the evidence may not be so easy, since he doesn't know where Brooklyn or Broadway are, only that they may have sought to rest on the nearby church, which Mazza happens to know was set to be demolished today.
Churches are on consecrated ground. They tend not to be dismantled. That's one reason we find them such a reliable roost. Also, immortals like the Highlander can't fight there, so less chance we lose a wing in our sleep when one of them chops the other's heads off and lightning starts striking all over. Did I ever tell you about Connor MacLeod?
The thing is, that church was donated to the city a while back and then turned into a museum. Now it's been sold to a developer. Lex figures he can track the two with his device and finally realizes it's gone, meaning Dracon must have taken it, and they have to go back to his hotel. Brooklyn managed to knock out the first guard that spotted him, only for two more to show up. He breaks through a window to escape, but apparently there wasn't enough wind for his wings to catch a ride. Even if the boys found their way home, flight conditions for gargoyles weren't too good tonight. The in-flight movie was Batman v Superman Ultimate Edition. Dracon, certain the tracking device will lead him to his inhuman enemies, gets a ring on his room phone. That quickly hangs up. It was a distraction by Elisa, and when his butler sees Lex on the balcony again and opens fire, all he got was 7 years bad luck, having shot a mirror reflecting his target from above the doorway. Lex and Hudson take him out, while Dracon is met with Goliath.
Go ahead. Ask me if I lift, bro.
As Tony is literally tossed aside, Elisa figures her friends have things covered and heads back to her apartment, hoping logging all this will help clear her head. She's trying to find a way to justify dragging the sewers beneath sacrilege. At first I wanted to say that she could just say she got an anonymous tip from someone at the scene that the gun used in the killing fell into the storm drain. But then there'd be questions about if there was a fight, if anything fit the witness's description of a monster, etc. So Elisa would just end up creating more questions that she can't answer. Beth knocks at the door, having been out but not wanting to be grilled about where. Back at the hotel, after finding the tracker and that it's still functional, Goliath and the others take off to the only blip that's showing. Though these panels oddly have you going left to right, then down and left again. It's kind of weird, but I've seen it happen before in comics. A little later, Glasses arrives after a trip to various electronic stores because his bandaged-up boss says there's a nest of flying freaks in the city.
I know, 'cause I've seen at least 3 of them.
I mean, at this point, it's 4. Goliath and Broadway and Deadly Force, and tonight, Lex and Hudson. Either his head hit that stone dolphin a little too hard, or Tony doesn't want to admit he can't count. His lieutenant purchased a tracker much like what Lex was wearing, adjusts it to the frequency he recalled the creatures was set at, and he gets a blip. Specifically, it's Brooklyn, having taken a while to move with no wind in the water until the backwash from a nearby helicopter provides some glide-friendly current. He's soon called over by Lex and the others, who are being watched by Dracon's men. One relays the information to the mobster, and despite not being a lip reader, manages to accurately guess they're about to split up, with Brooke heading to find the murder weapon, while the others look for Broadway, whose signal just popped into range. And what did that couple do when they found him? Fed him, and plenty. Saul seems a little irritated, suggesting maybe human food isn't good for him, but that didn't stop Sophie. Goyle's gotta eat, right? While he eats a little more before he has to get going, Brooklyn is outside Sacrilege when he's found by the 2 goons from the car, directed to that location by Dracon, and starts shooting. Brooke says he hates hurting people, but is fine with this exception as he chucks a sewer grate to take them out. Bonus, the gun was too heavy to get washed away, and was well within reach. Convenient! As Sophie was about to introduce her guest to latkes, Goliath appears, casually leaning outside the door, looking annoyed, and saying they have to go. And for some reason, this woman, who believed in gargoyles and wouldn't stop feeding one, is so overtaken by a couple more that she practically faints. Admittedly comical, but kinda feels off. Maybe she was overwhelmed at the thought of feeling obligated to feed them all too. Anyway, the wind is up, and they figure they can get airborne by taking off from a fountain on the property.
Assuming, of course, that Broadway does not now weigh too much to fly.
Maybe if he took a doggy bag to share with the clan, he won't get in as much trouble. Dracon, Glasses, and Sid the Butler show up, allegedly, according to Elisa's narration, firing laser guns, though they look just like the guns they've been using. But whatever kind of weaponry, they're still outmatched, and the fight is over pretty quickly. And even though they criticized his weight, Broadway takes out 2 of the 3 by chucking broken statue pieces at their heads, without ever dropping his sandwich. That's gotta count for something. Let's just hope that Sophie doesn't see the gangsters on the lawn and decide to overfeed them because she really liked the movie Johnny Dangerously. They're in unfamiliar territory, and the compass on Lex's tracker got broken in the fight, but fortunately Goliath can lead them back home. Okay, maybe it's meant to imply his superior tracking or aerial direction skills. It's never specified. But hey, they have the evidence their detective friend needs. At the station, Chavez is telling Maz's temporary partner to just go out and find her, regardless if he's her ideal co-worker.
You're the only guy on the duty roster who doesn't have blue flu.
The Smurfs have gone feral and are biting everything in sight. Symptoms include azure-colored rashes, focusing your whole personality on one trait, and nausea brought on by constantly singing an overly chipper song. Why didn't you help Neil Patrick Harris? You know the Smurfs, and you're a doctor for pretend! Elisa has narrowly managed to present the unique bullet and murder weapon in time to keep their suspect from walking. Hours later, 2 men are hauling a coffin from the Genutech vessel to a speedboat, its operator suggesting it was a test subject who flatlined. The 2 guys tell him to can the chatter and do his job, so he takes the box to be dumped 10 miles out from the nearby island. The two on the platform then talk about how the subject's death was their fault, and for all the boater knows, he's dumping an ordinary human body, which will get destroyed and they'll be fine. Though if she arises at nightfall, things will be more complicated for them, but their associate won't be able to squeal to Dr. Phobos, as the comic ends on a gargoyle woman busting out of the box and attacking the driver.
If she only comes out at night, she's a gargoyle's dream date, right?
The only thing we can be sure of historically is that she won't want to go out with Brooklyn. That was Gargoyles number 2 and 3 from Marvel, and this story was okay. It did get a little wonky with some of the physics, like the angle of the bullet that killed Price, and commercially available tracker watches, which I actually did try to look up and didn't find anything. Not to mention how the trio lost track of each other when the church and the club were so close. Panel and dialogue progression were very atypical at times, and while I still enjoy the art, there were some coloring flubs here and there. Not just with Elisa's hair or Bronx's tongue, but as with issue 1, a couple of the characters. While Maria Chavez was shown to have black hair and very dark skin in the first issue, she actually changes in between the second and third, having lighter skin in the latter, more in accordance with the show, but her hair was more light brown than reddish color. Dracon in the show had black hair, and here, well, not quite. I guess no one bothered to send the artists, or at least the colorists, any stills from the show or something. While it's still a nice touch to make references to and relate to the TV episodes, adding to the overall lore, it does feel a tad inconsistent with a series when we have civilians talk about and see gargoyles like they're no big thing. Sure, the cartoon had the clan get spotted plenty of times, but their presence still resonated like an urban legend, not unlike Batman for a time. I guess word could get around, and maybe it's me personally, something to do with seeing these previously animated characters in sequential art form. But perhaps the biggest sticking point is how utterly nonchalant Goliath is, that a pair of humans have spotted Broadway, know of their existence, and he just seems bored by it. Keep in mind, most people either run in terror or try to kill them, so you'd think he'd be a little more enthusiastic that one of his charges was found by a couple of good Samaritans. Well, one good Samaritan and her irate husband. The story feels a lot like something from the show, minus the murder. The trio exploring their new surroundings or modern technology, which leads them into unexpected danger. If Lex hadn't been fiddling with those trackers, they couldn't have been used against them by Dracon. However, it's possible, quite likely, had they instead been to the club earlier like the other two wanted, they might not have been around to save the witness or find the evidence Elisa needed. Though the Gargoyles never seemed to question how the gangsters found them, so it's kind of a fortunate coincidence that Lex's device breaks and he just discards it. I guess we just assume Broadway and Brooklyn got rid of theirs too, so now Dracon can't find them again. For all of its deviations from the cartoon, it does maintain much of that charm, like Bronx getting some gum, somehow managing to separate it from the packaging he just spat out, that's quite the talent for a dog, and blow a bubble, only for it to pop over his face. I noticed they left him behind for this adventure. I don't know much about gargoyle hound physiology, but if he hadn't gone for his nightly walkies yet, there may be a great big mess in the clock tower they need to clean up. Also, kind of a minor thing, the first issue ended on a teaser that they only kind of half fulfilled. They did give us more on the sinister Medusa project, if even a little bit, but nothing about the mysterious Demona. She doesn't show up, and she doesn't even get mentioned in either of these issues, so it's kind of weird that they would close on that kind of teaser and not fulfill it. But hey, maybe stuff had to change. Beth Maz's appearance feels like it could end up its own subplot. Perhaps Elisa trying to hide her flying friends from her if they visit, or maybe there's something going on in Beth's life, the nature of the argument she had with her parents, that will come to the fore in later issues. Then you have Levon. First assumption is that she was mutated into that gargoyle we saw at the end. Since Phobos said they were maybe a few weeks away from making their own goyles, though I could be wrong and it could be someone else entirely, which just adds to the intrigue of the story. If I'd been buying the title at the time, this may have been enough to keep my interest for the next issue. I could probably overlook most of the technical errors, as it feels like the book was still trying to get its footing. Or in this case, its air current. I'm the Angry Spork, and man, have I got issues.